Have you ever felt like life itself has conspired against you? That no matter how much you push, no matter how many times you tell yourself this time will be different, the doors never open? You rise early, stay late, pour everything you have into the hours between, yet somehow, the promotion goes to someone else. The lover walks away, the project collapses, just as it begins to bloom. It feels as if the universe has you marked, as if invisible hands pull you back every time you dare to step forward. Picture it. The glow of your laptop burning past midnight, your eyes heavy, your chest tight with hope. You send out another application, you press submit, and for a brief moment you allow yourself to believe. But days later, silence fills your inbox, a silence that gnaws at your sense of worth. Or imagine standing in a room where love was supposed to grow, giving your best words, your best effort, your best self, only to watch it slip through your fingers like water through a cracked vessel. These are not just moments of bad luck. They are the haunting repetitions of something deeper, something that lives beneath the surface. Psychologists call it learned helplessness, when repeated defeats rewire the brain to expect failure even before it arrives. It becomes less about what you can or cannot do, and more about what your nervous system has been trained to anticipate. Like a dog shocked one too many times, you begin to cower even when the cage door swings open. Neuroscience shows us that the brain remembers patterns, and each disappointment is another scar etched into the circuits of expectation. Slowly, failure stops being an event. It becomes a rhythm, a shadow, a mask that settles onto your face until you forget what lies beneath. You start to carry yourself differently. You shrink in conversations, apologizing before you've done anything wrong. You hesitate before opportunity, sabotaging yourself with the smallest excuses. Somewhere in the quiet of your mind, a whisper repeats, "Why try? You already know how this ends." The tragedy is that the world rarely sees this inner erosion. To them, you look like someone who isn't trying hard enough. To yourself, you feel like someone cursed to always fall short. But what if it isn't laziness? What if it isn't luck? What if failure isn't just what happens to you, but something you unknowingly carry within you, a ghost stitched into your psychology, following you wherever you go, turning every unlocked door into a wall? And if that's true, then the real question is, how did it get there? Have you ever wondered why some people seem to carry failure with them, like a birthmark, visible to no one but themselves, yet heavy enough to shape every choice they make? The roots often stretch back further than you realize, to a time when you were small, unformed, and desperate for love that felt just out of reach. Childhood is where the mind is soft clay, and every word, every silence, every withheld embrace leaves an impression that hardens with time. Picture a child hunched over a desk late at night, pencil in hand, carefully tracing each letter on the page. They rehearse the answers, they memorize the lines, and with trembling hands they offer their effort to the parent they love most. But instead of praise, the response is cold, clipped, still not good enough. In that moment, the child does not simply fail at spelling or math, they fail at being enough. The wound cuts deeper than the task. It cuts into the sense of self. What was once an event becomes an identity, a shadow that begins to whisper, "You are the problem, you are the disappointment." Attachment theory tells us that a child does not merely learn from instruction, but from the rhythm of acceptance and rejection. When warmth is inconsistent, when affection is tangled with judgment, the young nervous system begins to anticipate pain in the very places where safety should live. Neuroscience shows that repeated criticism or neglect heightens the brain's stress response, bathing it in cortisol, shaping neural pathways that equate effort with futility. The child internalizes a cruel equation. No matter what you do, the door will stay locked. and so they keep trying keys that never fit. They try harder in school, only to feel invisible. They smile wider, laugh louder, hoping to win approval, only to feel dismissed. Each failure is not just another key turning wrong, it is proof that the lock was never meant for them at all. Slowly, failure stops being about the test, the chore, the performance. It becomes a lens, a mask that clings to their face. The child learns to shrink before they are fully grown. The tragedy is that this lesson lingers long after childhood ends. The locked doors follow you into adulthood, in careers, in love, in friendships, each rejection echoing the first. The roots are buried so deeply that you forget where they began, and yet they keep feeding the same shadow. And so the question remains, what happens when this child grows older, when they step into the world carrying not just their dreams, but also the mask of failure pressed tightly against their skin? Have you noticed how well you've learned to hide? By the time you reach adulthood, the scars of childhood are rarely visible on the surface, yet they leave their fingerprints on everything you do. You build a face for the world, a mask polished with smiles, rehearsed laughter, the careful performance of competence. On the outside, you may look steady, reliable, even successful in fragments. But inside, the old shadow still whispers, convincing you that every effort is doomed before it begins. Imagine standing in an office, nodding along in a meeting, while deep down, you're terrified that the moment you speak, you'll expose how little you truly belong. You work late, deliver projects, yet when recognition comes, you feel unworthy, almost fraudulent. It's the oxygen mask, so that never gives air you breathe in, but the suffocation doesn't ease. And so, even as you appear composed, your inner world is cracking with quiet despair. In relationships, the same shadow lingers. You cling too tightly to people who treat you poorly, convinced that any love, even conditional, is better than none. Or you push away those who show genuine care, afraid they will eventually see the failure you see in yourself. Procrastination becomes a strange form of safety. If you never start, you can't prove yourself incapable. If you avoid the opportunity, you never have to face the humiliation of falling short. Self-sabotage isn't random. It's the body remembering, the mind protecting itself from the echo of doors slamming shut long ago. Psychologists call this the imposter syndrome, but it is more than that. It is the shadow of failure wearing your clothes, speaking with your voice, sabotaging your future under the guise of self-preservation. It tells you that you're simply being realistic, that you're not cut out for more, that you're protecting yourself from disappointment. But beneath those rationalizations lies the same pattern, replayed endlessly. The child at the locked door, now grown, still rattling keys that never fit. And so, adulthood becomes a performance, smiling while sinking, building while secretly waiting for collapse, loving while fearing abandonment. The mask is convincing, so convincing that sometimes you even fool yourself. Yet deep down, you feel it, the gnawing sense that something invisible holds you back. But why does this happen? Why does the mind cling to failure as if it were safer than success? To understand that, we must look beyond the mask, into the science of how habits of defeat root themselves in the brain, shaping every choice long before you realize you've made it. Why is it that even when the storm has passed, you still feel the rain? Why, long after the cruel voices have gone silent, do you? To continue to hear their echoes in your own mind? The answer lies not in weakness, but in the way your brain has been trained to expect failure, the way your very nervous system has been conditioned to prepare for disappointment before it even arrives. In the 1960 seconds, psychologist Martin Seligman uncovered what he called learned helplessness. Dogs placed in cages, shocked repeatedly, eventually stopped trying to escape. Even when the doors were left open, they remained curled in the corner, trembling, unwilling to test their freedom. The cruelty of the experiment is its revelation. Repeated defeat teaches the body to surrender. And the same principle applies to you. When you are told, again and again, that your efforts are not enough. When you experience loss after loss, rejection after rejection, the brain begins to carve a groove, a neural pathway of inevitability. It tells you, why try when you already know the ending? Neuroscience confirms this grim truth. Each disappointment floods your system with stress hormones. Each rejection strengthens the synapses that bind effort to futility. The prefrontal cortex, where possibility lives, dims its light, while the amygdala, the brain's fear center, sharpens its claws. Over time, it isn't just a thought that you'll fail, it is a felt certainty, an embodied truth. Failure becomes not an external event, but an internal identity. And then come the distortions. Cognitive psychology describes how the mind twists reality to fit its script. One rejection becomes evidence that everyone will reject you. One mistake becomes proof that you are incapable of success. These distortions aren't chosen. They are the survival strategies of a mind trying to make sense of endless pain. You begin to predict defeat as a way to protect yourself from the shock of it. But in doing so, you ensure the prophecy fulfills itself. Beyond the individual, there are larger forces at play. Social science reminds us that opportunity is not equal. Class, inequality, systemic barriers, they shape who gets second chances and who is left behind. For some, failure is not just psychological, it is the architecture of their environment. But here is the cruel twist. When society blocks the doors and the brain learns not to knock, you begin to believe the fault lies entirely within you. And so the cycle persists, not because you are incapable, but because your brain, your memories, and even the world around you have conspired to teach you that failure is the safest expectation. But the story doesn't end here, for there is a darker transformation still, one where failure no longer feels like an intruder, but becomes a shadow you carry willingly, mistaking it for home. What happens when failure stops being something that happens to you and starts becoming who you are? There is a moment, often unnoticed, when the line between event and identity blurs, when the repeated wounds of disappointment no longer feel like temporary setbacks, but instead harden into the belief that this is simply your place in the world. Failure becomes less of an intruder and more of a companion, a shadow that follows you faithfully, whispering in your ear that, at least with it, you will never be surprised. Imagine a man sitting in the charred remains of a burned house. The roof has collapsed, the walls are blackened, the air still carries the scent of smoke, yet he refuses to leave. He calls this ruin his home, because in its brokenness there is at least familiarity. Success, to him, is the unknown, a territory filled with risk, with the possibility of greater loss. Failure, though painful, is predictable. It is safe in its devastation. Psychology calls this a paradox of self-preservation. When the nervous system has been conditioned to equate effort with pain, it learns to cling to the pain it already knows rather than step into the terror of uncertainty. This is why some people sabotage opportunities that could change their lives. It is not laziness, it is fear. The fear that stepping into light might expose new shadows. The fear that if success arrives, it could be taken away, and the loss would be unbearable. In relationships, this identity can be even more haunting. You find yourself drawn to partners who confirm the story you already carry. Partners who dismiss you, who abandon you, who mirror the voice from long ago that said you weren't enough. On some level, you know this dynamic hurts, yet it feels strangely right because it fits the script you've been rehearsing your whole life. The monster you know feels safer than the unknown of genuine love. Neuroscience supports this strange loyalty to failure. The brain craves patterns, even destructive ones, because patterns offer predictability. Familiar suffering is less frightening than unfamiliar hope, and so you circle the same cycle, mistaking the ashes of a burned life for shelter. But here is the cruelest truth. Once failure fuses with identity, you no longer fight it, you defend it. You protect it, because without it, you are no one. And yet, This isn't only an individual tragedy. The world you live in, the culture around you, often reinforces this shadow, rewarding resilience in silence, punishing vulnerability, and shaping a society where people quietly accept their own ruin as destiny. The question then becomes, how much of this shadow is truly yours, and how much has been placed upon you by the myths of the world you were born into? Have you ever noticed how the world speaks to you in riddles of certainty? From the time you are young, you are told that hard work always pays off, that success is a matter of discipline, that those who fail simply did not try hard enough. These myths are repeated like hymns, etched into classrooms, whispered at family tables, plastered across advertisements that promise transformation if only you give more of yourself. But what no one tells you is the cruelty hidden inside these mantras. Because if you have worked until your bones ached and still found yourself standing outside locked doors, the failure is not just in the outcome, it becomes, in the eyes of society, a flaw in you. Picture the single mother working 2 jobs, collapsing into bed after midnight, yet still unable to escape debt. Or the student who studies in the dim light of a flickering bulb, believing the lie that equal effort yields equal reward, only to be crushed by the reality of poverty and class. Society praises grit, but ignores the invisible walls of inequality, trauma, and systemic blocks that some are born behind. And so the myth of hard work pays off becomes a blade turned inward, cutting deepest into those who are already wounded. Psychologists call this internalized failure. When the narratives of culture collide with personal struggle, the blame shifts entirely onto the individual. Instead of recognizing the weight of circumstance, you begin to believe that you are broken, that everyone else found the secret formula you somehow missed. Neuroscience shows us that shame is one of the most destructive emotions for the brain. It corrodes self-worth, hijacks the nervous system, and cements patterns of avoidance. Yet shame is precisely what society feeds you when you do not measure up to its myths. And then comes the mask. Because while society applauds resilience, it despises visible brokenness. You are rewarded for hiding your despair, for smiling through collapse, for pretending that you are fine. Vulnerability is punished, while performance is praised. This is why so many walk through life like actors, carrying invisible coffins on their backs while applauded for their composure. The culture does not ask if you are drowning, it only asks that you do not disturb the surface. The weight of these myths is unbearable, not because you have failed, but because you were told that failure is proof of your worthlessness. Slowly, the stories you inherited become the prison you live in. And when the walls of this prison close in, the damage is not just intellectual, it seeps into the marrow of your emotional life, leaving you gasping under the invisible pressure of expectations you were never meant to bear. Which leads to the deeper question, what happens to the human heart when these myths finally break it down? What does it do to a human soul to live with the weight of constant defeat? Not the dramatic failures that erupt in headlines, but the quiet, private collapses, the job lost in silence, the love that fades without explanation, the dream that dies before it even finds words. Over time, these moments do not remain isolated. They accumulate, layering themselves onto your chest until breathing itself feels like labor. Anxiety becomes your closest companion, arriving each morning before you open your eyes. You wake not to possibility but to dread, your mind racing through all the ways today could betray you. At night, insomnia takes its turn, filling the darkness with relentless replay. The words you shouldn't have said, the risks you should have taken, the endless chorus of what-ifs that pierce like needles into the fabric of sleep. Depression follows, a heavy fog that doesn't scream but suffocates, convincing you that trying again would only deepen the wound. Families fracture under this weight. The unspoken tension of financial despair seeps into dinner tables, where silence becomes thicker than conversation. Children sense it in the way their parents' smiles no longer reach their eyes. Partners feel it in the growing distance, in the walls built out of unspoken fears and disappointments. Love begins to warp under the strain, ambition shrivels, and self-worth erodes until you no longer ask, "What do I deserve?" but rather, "Do I deserve anything at all?" It is like carrying a coffin on your back, not of someone else, but of the person you thought you could become. Each step forward is slowed by the unbearable weight of who you might have been, dragging behind you like a corpse that refuses to be buried. Or it is like living in a room where the lights never turn on, where even when the sun is shining outside, your windows are painted black. You stumble through days without color, trapped in shadows that have become too familiar to leave. Neuroscience tells us that chronic stress and failure reshape the brain itself. The hippocampus, where memory and learning live, begins to shrink. The amygdala, where fear thrives, grows sharper, more reactive. Psychologists warn of the cycle. The more you fail, the less capable you feel, and the less capable you feel, the more you fail. It is not just circumstance anymore, it is biology, psychology, and emotion conspiring against you. And yet, even in this collapse, something lingers, a spark that refuses to die completely, a fragile truth hidden in the ashes, that no cycle is unbreakable, that even the deepest patterns can be rewoven. The path is difficult, fragile, and often slow, but within the ruins of failure lies the first stone of a new foundation. The question is whether you will find the strength to place it. What if the curse of failure is not unbreakable? What if, buried beneath the rubble of all the closed doors and shattered hopes, there is still a key not to unlock the past, but to open a future you have yet to believe in? The first truth you must face is this: your worth was never meant to be measured by outcomes. You were taught to believe that success was proof of value, and failure was proof of shame. But worth is not a prize handed out by the world. It is the soil you were born with, the ground beneath every step you take. To reframe it is to remember that even in the absence of recognition, you are still enough. Think of boundaries as the walls of a fragile sanctuary. For too long, the voices of criticism, parents, partners, society itself have walked freely through your mind, carving their shadows into your sense of self. Building boundaries does not mean shutting the world out. It means refusing to let those voices dictate the script of your life. Each no you speak to their poison becomes a yes to your own healing. The inner work is often invisible, and yet it is where the deepest shifts occur. Journaling is not just writing words on paper, it is laying your shadow bare, dragging it from the darkness, where it controls you into the light, where you can finally see it. Therapy offers mirrors you cannot hold alone, reflections that help you notice how the old stories still steer your choices. Shadow work asks you to turn toward the monster within, not to slay it, but to learn its name, to realize that the thing you feared was often just the child you once were, still waiting to be heard. And then there are the small victories, the kind so modest they almost feel meaningless, making the call you've been avoiding, finishing the page you swore you couldn't write, getting out of bed on a day when the weight said stay. Neuroscience reminds us that repetition rewires belief. Each tiny act is a stitch in a new pattern, proof that the story can shift, that the locked door may open with persistence rather than force. Healing will not make you flawless. It will not turn you into a figure who never stumbles again. But that was never the goal. This is not about perfection. It is about reclaiming dignity, the dignity of trying again, without carrying the corpse of failure on your back, the dignity of existing as someone who refuses to let the past dictate every tomorrow. And once you begin to taste that quiet dignity, you realize something haunting and beautiful, that the true victory was never in outrunning failure, but in learning to live with it without letting it define you. What if failure was never the villain you believed it to be? What if, instead of being the tombstone of your story, it was the soil dark, heavy, and often unforgiving, yet capable of nourishing something you cannot yet imagine? You have been taught to measure your life in victories, in milestones reached, in dreams fulfilled. But the truth is, meaning rarely blooms in the sunshine of success. It grows in the shadows, in the quiet nights when you thought you were finished, in the mornings when you rose again despite having no reason to. Picture the gardener who plants in barren earth. Season after season, nothing grows. Yet, with each attempt, the soil changes, enriched by effort, thickened by persistence. The harvest, when it comes, is not only fruit but wisdom, the kind that can only be grown through the patience of tending what once looked like wasteland. Failure, too, works this way. It grinds you down, but in that grinding, it prepares you. It teaches you how to endure, how to see yourself not only in moments of triumph, but in the silence of survival. Philosophers remind us that existence itself is not a guarantee of meaning. It must be carved, shaped, wrestled from the raw materials of suffering. Neuroscience adds to this, showing that resilience is not an innate gift, but a muscle one that strengthens with use, one that emerges through the repetition of standing up again. You may not always control outcomes, but you can control whether you remain on the ground or rise once more. The quiet triumph is not in becoming untouchable, nor in achieving the flawless life. It is in walking forward even as the shadow of failure trails behind you, refusing to let it define you. Success may be rare, unpredictable, and fleeting, but courage, the courage to continue living fully, to risk again, to love again, to create again, that is yours to claim. And in the end, that courage is what separates the broken from the transformed. So, perhaps failure is not the end of your story, but the very beginning of meaning. Perhaps the ashes you carry are not proof of ruin, but the ground from which your strength will rise. If you dare to plant again, if you dare to continue, then failure becomes not your curse, but your teacher. And as you sit with this truth, let it echo softly within you. You were never defined by what collapsed. You are defined by the fact that you are still here, breathing, willing, ready to try again. That is the quiet triumph no one can take from you.